But can you address the criticism now over the budget issue and the slashing, $17 million slashing
I think
of the
if
budget?
you go back and look at the reductions that were made, there were no reductions that were made that would have impacted the situation that we were dealing with over the last couple of days.
A few moments later.
But was the budget cut?
Yes, it was cut, and it did impact our ability to provide service.
Let's talk about that memo. You sent a memo, a scathing memo, to the Board of Fire Commissioners where you expressed your concern that you were not going to be able to do your job. Your firefighters would not be able to respond adequately to a major emergency like a wildfire, like what we're seeing right now.
Flashback.
Los Angeles Fire Department is launching its first ever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau. It is dedicated to ensuring a fair and equal workplace environment.
So by creating this new bureau, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau, now we actually have the staff to do the work when it comes to doing a deep dive in regard to how we do business.
That, of course, included the torture of DEI classes.
Crowley's official bio says Chief Crowley leads a diverse department, creating, supporting, and promoting a culture that values diversity, inclusion, and equity while striving to meet and exceed the expectations of the communities. Well, you didn't exceed my expectations, which was that the whole city wouldn't burn down.
All right, let's just look at the reality of what's happening with this LA fire situation. So, if you've been keeping up with the news, you may have noticed there are some wildfires happening in Los Angeles, California. Now, this isn't new for this area because they have wildfires all the time, but nothing at the scale of what's happening now.
Tonight, Bill Whitaker is covering the historic LA wildfires from the air and from the ground, starting in Altadena, California.
The Eaton fire burst out of the San Gabriel Mountains above Altadena Tuesday night. It has since devoured more than 7,000 homes and structures in this tight-knit, diverse community, making it one of the most savage firestorms in Los Angeles County's history. The death toll is rising. Wildfires are a fact of life here, but nothing prepared people for destruction on this scale.
So we live in a place that we know wildfires are a problem, but the Democrats had a great idea. Let's cut the fire department budget.
Since day one, this is my third budget as we're going into 25-26. What I can tell you is we are still understaffed, we're still under-resourced, and we're still underfunded. So with that, whether it's $7 million, $10 million.
But was the budget cut, Chief?
Yes, it was cut, and it did impact our ability to provide service.
Let's talk about that memo. You sent a memo, a scathing memo, to the Board of Fire Commissioners where you expressed your concern that you were not going to be able to do your job. Your firefighters would not be able to respond adequately to a major emergency like a wildfire, like what we're seeing right now.
Now, the firefighters have actually produced a memo of how the budget cuts affected their response to this fire. Here's what they had to say.
We've reported how the city cut the fire department's budget by nearly $18 million, how the chief sent a memo to the Board of Fire Commissioners saying that was a critical issue that impacts wildfires, and how the commission president just weeks ago declared this was a crisis.
We are in crisis mode.
Now, after the mayor has claimed this was not an issue,
There were no reductions that were made that would have impacted the situation.
and after the fire chief, Kristen Crowley, first backed that up.
We made our adjustments. We're working closely with Mayor Bass. She's supporting us on this.
But then contradicted the mayor.
It did absolutely negatively impact.
This letter spells out budget cut details apparently from firefighters themselves. For example, they say a critical issue was not having reserve fire engines and firefighters at the ready as in years past. There once were 10 reserve engines, they say, but now in this fire claim there were none available. Think of what 10 additional fire engines can do, they point out.
Now, in that clip, they said, my God, what if we had just 10 extra fire engines? That would have made a difference. Those are the firefighters from LA, retired and current. But I'm going to tell you, they had the 10 extra fire engines. They just didn't work. Listen to the state of the fire engines in the LA Fire Department. It's going to shock you.
Take a look at this video that we captured earlier today. This is what we found. You are looking at dozens of LAFD apparatus at what's known as the boneyard. Now, we're talking about things like fire engines, ambulances, and ladder trucks. This is essentially a maintenance yard. The reason we bring this up is because we found a budget request in which LAFD Chief Crowley wrote to the Fire Commission. Here's the quote. The LAFD emergency fleet is in constant state of disrepair, attributable to years of deferred maintenance, deferred vehicle replacement, and the lack of resources for adequate staffing and replacement parts. In addition, in May of last year, a restoration request from the city administrative officer said that 89 out of 584 apparatus were out of service.
Been talking about this for well over a year now. There are almost 100 fire engines and fire trucks and ambulances sitting over at the boneyard, $1 million apparatuses out of service because there aren't adequate mechanics to fix them. The scale of those vehicles just sitting there, rows and rows and rows, with weeds growing up around the tires, is infuriating.
So the budget cuts obviously affected how they took care of their equipment, right? They didn't have enough fire engines. Look, they're all sitting at the boneyard. But what about staffing? Well, they also had to cut staffing. Here's a fire chief begging for more firefighters.
What is your message to city administrators, starting with Mayor Bass?
My message is the fire department needs to be properly funded.
And it's not.
It's not at this point, and we've got the justification. We know where our gaps in service are. We know we need 62 new fire stations. We need to double the size of our firefighters. The growth of this city since 1960 has doubled, and we have less fire stations.
Let's repeat that, because those numbers are a little jarring. 20 years ago, you had more fire stations than you had now?
We had 112 fire stations. Now we have 106. And since 2010, we've had an increase, doubled our call volume, which is firefighters responding to calls, 55% increase with 68 less firefighters.
So the city funding is not keeping up with the city's needs in real time.
No, and that's what our firefighters need.
Now, let's just put it all together. Not enough fire trucks. Not enough people to run the fire trucks. Not enough people to fix the fire trucks when they break down. What about fire hydrants? Well, they had over 300 fire hydrants stolen and broken in the city, and the fire department couldn't address it because of the budget cuts.
Axios ran a story on how getting the water out of the hydrants in Pacific Palisades was more complicated than it seems. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's very complicated. That's why I pay 13% of my income in this state every year to people who I assumed were working on things like this. When asked why so many of the hydrants in the Palisades ran out of water, Governor Newsom said the local folks are trying to figure that out. Yeah, you got to do that before the fire. At least in the Palisades, the hydrants were still there. 300 other ones around the city are just gone.
So it's pretty clear. Lack of manpower, lack of fire trucks, hydrants missing, and a whole bunch of other things that occurred when you defund your fire department. But with those limited resources now, you've already taken away all that stuff. What were you spending that money on? Well, the LA Fire Department invested in DEI training and actually hired a whole staff for DEI. They call it the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau. Here's the chief talking about it.
Los Angeles Fire Department is launching its first ever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau. It is dedicated to ensuring a fair and equal workplace environment.
So by creating this new bureau, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau, now we actually have the staff to do the work when it comes to doing a deep dive in regard to how we do business.
That, of course, included the torture of DEI classes.
We are hosting our new employee orientation, and our focus is to teach our new employees for them to understand cultural competency, identify implicit and unconscious bias, and be aware of the importance of us having a diverse and inclusive workforce.
I welcome all of you in this room to join, whether you're LGBTQ plus or not, or you're just an ally, you have family members, anybody that's willing to engage.
The Los Angeles County Fire Department would be recognized nationally and possibly even globally as an agency that was very serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Now think about how much it costs to do all of this. You have to hire the trainers. All these people who are in there are actually getting paid, right? They're not sitting in there for free. So that's a cost. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. There was even an ad campaign. Check it out.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better.
So we should be sending white firefighters to White Houses and black ones to... Who teaches people this bullshit? No one cares what someone looks like when they're pulling you out of a burning house.
Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
Now really understand how bad that last part of the ad was. Now the deputy fire chief is admitting that they are hiring people that are not competent to be firefighters because of what they look like. Either you're black, either you're a woman. Because of how you look, we're hiring you, not because you can do the job. And then she goes and blames the victim. Hey, if you're in a place where you need us to do our job. But remember, my initial question was, how much did all of this cost? How much do these DEI initiatives hurt the bottom line? So let's wrap our head around it. We know for a fact that about $17 or $18 million was taken out of the fire department, and that went to maintenance of fire engines, that went to hiring people and fire prevention services like preventing wildfires, right? We know that for a fact. Now, PolitiFacts is saying that the DEI initiatives were only budgeted to about $2.6 million. Now, this is the criticism of the DEI initiative. You're saying you don't have enough money for firefighters, you don't have enough money for fire engines. You don't have enough money to even make sure the fire hydrants have water in it. You're cutting the budget, but yet you find almost $3 million to pay for something that obviously is not going to fire prevention services. Now, this is the main criticism of the DEI initiative from the LA Fire Department, that the people up top were too focused on things like virtue signaling and not focused enough on the nitty gritty, the things that need to be done in everyday life. Here is Bill Maher explaining it.
The good news is our fire chief is a lesbian. Am I against a lesbian being chief? Of course not. Do I think a lesbian can do the job? Of course I do. And maybe she's the best person for the job. Or maybe they really wanted a lesbian in that job, and she's just the best lesbian for the job. And with essential services, that's not good enough. Crowley's official bio says Chief Crowley leads a diverse department, creating, supporting, and promoting a culture that values diversity, inclusion, and equity while striving to meet and exceed the expectations of the community. But it's telling that diversity is mentioned twice before we get to while striving to meet expectations. Now, can you do two things at once? Yes. But it matters where your head is. Deputy Chief Kristen Larson said this.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you.
Which would sound kind of racist if a Southern sheriff said it.
So let's just recap. The budget cuts to things like fire prevention hurt the response. The fact that there was no water in some of the fire hydrants, the fact that some of the fire hydrants were absolutely missing, actually were also a problem. Manpower shortages for not having enough firefighters. What about equipment shortages? The fact that you had all those equipment that couldn't be fixed because you don't have anybody to fix them. All of those led to issues with the response to the fire. And finally, the reallocation of resources from fire prevention to DEI initiatives seems to also be something that exacerbated the problem. Now, that last little sentence that I just said, people are going to have an issue with. They did not take money from fire prevention and put it into DEI services. They're going to say that's fake news. Matter of fact, here's a whole video. What I just said was fake news. They're going to say it. Here it is.
Fighters continue fighting the wildfires out in California. A lot of disinformation regarding the fires and the response to them. One of the viral claims we've been seeing is that the Los Angeles Fire Department focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives instead of the ability to fight fires. This viral claim stems from a post on X by Elon Musk where he claimed the LA Fire Department prioritized diversity over saving lives. So let's verify. Did LAFD prioritize DEI over firefighting ability?
Now, we know the answer to this. I just shown you all the clips, right? They removed money from things like fire prevention for wildfires. Here's the clip again if you forgot.
But was the budget cut, Chief?
Yes, it was cut, and it did impact our ability to provide service.
And we also know they spent the $2.6 million to create the Bureau of DEI.
So by creating this new bureau, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau, now we actually have the staff to do the work when it comes to doing a deep dive in regard to how we do business.
So, $17 million went out of fire prevention, $3 million went into DEI. Those are facts. So let's see if Verified.com agrees with those facts.
Our sources, Sean Harper, a professor at the University of Southern California School of Education, and Erica Foldy, an associate professor at New York University, as well as LA Fire Chief Kristen Crowley. Both Professor Harper and Professor Foldy told ABC News there's no evidence to suggest that money was taken from fire prevention initiatives and given to DEI programs. Professor Harper called the claim, quote, disgustingly opportunistic, end quote. Professor Foldy said, quote, it's hard to overstate how ridiculous this is, end quote. Last week, LA Fire Chief Kristen Crowley said in an interview that budget cuts by the city of Los Angeles impacted the department's ability to provide service. In that interview, Crowley said LAFD used to have 112 fire stations. They now have 106, and they also have 68 fewer firefighters. So no, the LA Fire Department did not take money from fire prevention and put that money towards DEI initiative.
So Verify seems to be horribly wrong. They say their sources say they have nothing to do with each other. Yes, it does. They took money from fire prevention, as you just said. But where did they spend that money? Well, they didn't go that far because obviously they have a narrative to push, right? So yes, are the LA fires a result of DEI? No, absolutely not. It's not one single thing. There is a whole wealth of mismanagement and incompetence to go around. But to tell the story of the LA fires, you have to tell the story of the budget cuts. And then you also have to tell the story of where that money did go. What did they prioritize instead of fire prevention? They prioritized DEI and spent money to that end. So it's not false, in my opinion, to say, yes, they removed money from important firefighter-related services and reallocated those to prioritize DEI initiatives. Even though that amount was small, that is truth. But I'm a crazy conservative. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section. Tell me, because people are going to watch this video and says, I'm spreading misinformation. I'd like you to point it out. Tell me where you find it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'm out of here. Peace.